In the heart of Cold War Moscow, Adolf Tolkachev worked at one of the Soviet Union's most secretive military research centers, the Scientific Research Institute of Radio Engineering. He wasn't a soldier, a politician, or a known dissident. He was a mild-mannered radar engineer with a quiet demeanor, unremarkable appearance, and a government-issued desk. But behind his thick glasses and worn briefcase, Tolkachev carried something far more dangerous than a weapon: resentment. His wife's family had been purged under Stalin, executed or imprisoned without trial. The repression never left him. He despised the hypocrisy of the regime and the lies fed to citizens. By the late 1970s, he made a decision few in Soviet Moscow would dare consider. He would betray his country, not for ideology, but revenge. Not for freedom, but to strike back. Tolkachev began approaching the CIA through anonymous messages left on windshields and bold drop attempts outside the US Embassy. And finally, after months of rejections and suspicion, the CIA took him seriously. What they would receive from him would change the course of military strategy for years.
The CIA had long feared meeting spies on the streets of Moscow. The city was swarming with KGB surveillance. There was the unpredictability of these teams that the KGB would send out that even their own people didn't know about, just to roam around and look for anything suspicious.
But Tolkachev was no ordinary source. He was obsessive about tradecraft. He refused to meet unless the CIA followed procedures to the letter. He memorized license plate numbers of surveillance cars, tested routes for patterns, and insisted on specific times and methods for contact. To transmit secrets, he used miniature cameras hidden in pens, concealed film canisters inside car air vents, and passed documents via dead drops tucked into construction rubble or public toilets. For almost a decade, Tolkachev walked through the heart of Moscow with KGB agents within arm's reach, passing America documents that could, and did, shift the balance of power in the skies. What he gave wasn't just paper. It was insight into Soviet radar systems, air defense tactics, and long-range weapons. The KGB never saw it coming, because they were too busy watching the loud ones, the reckless ones. Tolkachev was neither. The data he provided was worth more than gold. Tolkachev gave the United States blueprints of advanced Soviet radar installations, weaknesses in aircraft design, and how to exploit Soviet air defenses. He exposed jamming vulnerabilities in the MiG-29 and Su-27, jets that would come to define the Soviet Air Force. He revealed design flaws that let US pilots evade detection, and future systems still in planning. American defense contractors and intelligence analysts scrambled to process his intelligence. What they found saved the Pentagon billions in research and weapon development. They no longer needed to guess what the Soviets might build. They had the blueprints. His documents informed the design of countermeasures, stealth strategies, and even the planning of US aircraft like the F-117. His codename within the CIA became something legendary: the billion-dollar spy. And for nearly 10 years, the man behind it remained an invisible ghost, fooling the most paranoid security service on Earth. Moscow in the 1980s was an intelligence nightmare, a maze of surveillance. Foreigners couldn't walk down the street without a tail. But somehow, Tolkachev managed. He kept his behavior rigidly normal and kept his contacts with the CIA untraceable. The agency, to match his risk, began experimenting with cutting-edge tools: a pen radio that could receive short commands, dead drop devices that looked like trash, and one-time use signal transmitters for safe pickups. Tolkachev's demands were strict: more film, better equipment, bigger rewards. He even asked for Western rock albums for his son. And while that might have seemed small, it was part of the illusion. He was playing the long game, hiding espionage behind the boredom of routine life. The KGB never suspected him, not because he wasn't dangerous, but because he didn't fit the profile. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't rebellious, he was just another quiet man behind a desk. Until he wasn't. In 1985, two American traders, Edward Lee Howard and Aldrich Ames, both with deep access to CIA operations, exposed Tolkachev's name. One out of revenge, the other for money. The Soviets acted swiftly. Tolkachev was arrested on the streets of Moscow, interrogated, and executed in 1986. The CIA had no chance to warn him. Even his final messages were intercepted. His wife was left in silence. His son never received an explanation. The man who had risked everything for a country he never visited was abandoned by the very agency he helped empower. The CIA called it one of their worst failures, not for the operation, but for letting a hero die because of their own internal rot. Tolkachev's identity remained buried for years, but his work didn't. U.S. military dominance in the skies for decades owed a silent debt to a man who took his stand with a camera and conviction. After his execution, the Soviet Union buried Tolkachev's name, erasing him from documents, airbrushing his past, and never acknowledging the breach. Only decades later, after the fall of the USSR and the declassification of CIA files, did his name emerge publicly. Journalists and historians pieced the puzzle together. Internal memos, agent files, and debriefs began to paint a full picture. And it stunned even seasoned intelligence veterans. The impact of his espionage was greater than anyone had imagined. It wasn't just information, it was game-changing knowledge delivered in complete silence. And while Tolkachev never lived to see the collapse of the regime he despised, many believe he helped weaken it from the inside. In internal assessments, the CIA later admitted that they hadn't just lost an asset, they had lost a man who had changed the Cold War. His codename, CKSPHERE, would appear in redacted memos and post-mortems for decades. But inside the agency, the name Adolf Tolkachev became something more, a symbol of betrayal, sacrifice, and the high cost of intelligence failure. Tolkachev's arrest sent shockwaves through the Soviet defense sector. Trust collapsed. Internal investigations erupted. Dozens of engineers, scientists, and mid-level officers were interrogated. The KGB scrambled to assess the damage, but the truth was almost too vast to comprehend. American defense programs had leapfrogged years ahead. Soviet radar vulnerabilities were fully exposed, and internal confidence in the regime's security protocols plummeted. Tolkachev had done what no missile, aircraft, or satellite could. He had cracked the very heart of Soviet secrecy, and in doing so, accelerated the imbalance that would help end the Cold War. Had Adolf Tolkachev survived past 1985, the intelligence breakthroughs might have gone even further. At the time of his arrest, he was already beginning to uncover the next generation of Soviet stealth systems and long-range radar upgrades, technologies that would later appear in advanced fighters and surface-to-air missile defenses. His reports hinted at vulnerabilities the U.S. hadn't yet exploited. If not for the betrayal by Ames and Howard, the United States may have entered the 1990s with an even greater lead in electronic warfare and aerial dominance. Instead, a single breach cut off the flow and silenced one of the most valuable intelligence sources of the Cold War.